never met before. This administration denying diapers to the 5-month-old, denying toothpaste and soap and a fresh set of clothes for kids who've been kept for weeks or months in these squalid conditions, sleeping on concrete floors under tin-foil blankets. And the worst torture of all is not knowing when or even if you're going to see your mother or your father again. Think about yourself. Think about your own kids. Think about what that would do to your family and to their heads. We've got to be better than this, because it's not just happening in Clint, Texas. It's in Homestead, Florida. It's in Southwest Key, in Houston. We have the largest mass incarceration of children who have committed no crime whatsoever in the history of the United States, with perhaps the exception of when we jailed and interned Japanese Americans based on their race and their ethnicity during World War II. And I remember reading that chapter in my history book and thinking to myself, man, if I was alive in 1942 and 1943, I would have stood up and said something about it. I'm so ashamed that our country had done that to our fellow Americans. And yet here we are in 2019, and we are doing this to these kids. We've already lost the lives of 6 children who are in our custody, completely defenseless and vulnerable and desperate. And this, the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, is doing this to the least of these. This cannot be us going forward, and we can take no solace that the decision was made by one man, the President of the United States, because in a democracy, government of, by, and for the people, every single day that this persists, it is on every single one of us. So for those of you who stood up at the Lights for Liberty event, those of you who came down to the tent city in Tornillo, Texas, where separated children were kept so that you could keep vigil, testify back to your fellow Americans, ensure that they know what happens in their name, that kind of activism and advocacy really works. It changes the practices of this country and forms the political pressure to make sure that we live up to our potential and fulfill our promise. Are you all with me on this one? Reverse these practices as soon as we can, and then work together, not as Democrats, but as Americans, to rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image. From your perspective here, from mine in El Paso, Texas, from every single part of this country, I begin by making sure that we never cage another child, that we pay any price to reunite those families that have been separated already. We don't criminalize people for seeking asylum or refuge in this country. 1 million dreamers who call the United States home, let's forever free them of any fear of deportation by making them That would be a great place for us to start. And let's remember and remind ourselves, the ultimate beneficiary of immigration is not the immigrants themselves or their families. It is all of us as a country. This is what has made us the greatest, the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet. The fact that we just celebrated 243 years ago this foundational principle. We decided, almost alone in the nations in the history of the world, that we would define ourselves not by race, not by ethnicity, not by common ancestry, but this idea, this premise that we are all created equal. We haven't yet lived up to that, right? But that's the foundational principle, and we strive to get there every single day. So let's make sure that we do, and not just in immigration, because I'm hearing from so many of you that you're not well enough, or you have a family member who's not well enough to be able to live to their full potential, to reveal their genius to the rest of this country, who are rationing the medications that you're able to afford only by stretching that dollar in your house, or you're unable to get any care at all. On our last visit to Iowa, someone told me that this state ranks 51st in the country in access to mental health care. In my home state of Texas, our largest provider of mental health care services is the county jail system. And I cannot tell you at how many meetings like this, someone has stood up and said, Beto, I want to tell you that my brother or my mother or my little sister gets arrested on purpose to treat her schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or depression, gets incarcerated at the cost of $110 a night, and also at the cost of locking up their potential, their ability to finish their education or work a job or start a business or raise their family or rock out in a punk rock band, whatever they are supposed to do in their time on the planet, no longer well enough to be able to achieve that. What if we met that challenge? Again, not on a partisan basis, but guaranteeing every single American access to world-class primary, medical, mental health care, and also every single woman the full spectrum of reproductive health care, able to make her own decisions about her own body, that makes that possible. And there is a really common sense approach to this. Some have tried to offer us a false choice. Either you keep the status quo or even roll back the Affordable Care Act, or you get rid of it altogether and you go straight to a single payer system. What if we did this? What if we said, for the tens of millions of our fellow Americans who can get no care at all today, we immediately enroll you in Medicare. Those of you who are insufficiently insured, you cannot afford that copay or that premium, you can't bridge that deductible, you're able to enroll in Medicare as well. But if you're one of the tens of millions of our fellow Americans who has employer-sponsored insurance and you like it because it works for you or your family, you're a member of a union, and you fought for that health care plan and you don't want to lose it now, you're able to keep it as well. So universal, guaranteed, high-quality care that preserves choice. I think we can bring our fellow Americans into this and get it done. What do you all think? Yeah? Por último, and then I want to hear what's on your mind, one last big challenge before us that I've been listening to your fellow Iowans and our fellow Americans on, and that is climate change. And the fact that what we are seeing in this state alone, highest levels of runoff into the Missouri River Basin in the recorded history of the Missouri River, producing the greatest floods southwest of here in Pacific Junction. Listening to people who in their entire lifetimes, in the lifetime of that city, have not seen significant flooding, who now are recuperating from the greatest flood in that city's history, every single home underwater. The farmers that we met just outside of Pacific Junction, who are already struggling underwater in debt, their fields now literally lakes, the stored grain, the soybeans in those storage bins, unable to find markets in China that have been closed down to them by this president, literally exploding from soaking up all that water. I will never forget the smell of those rotting soybeans on the ground and the look on those farmers' faces who have worked a lifetime to open up those markets. But it was those same farmers who said, look, we want to do our part in confronting climate change before it is too late. What if we can make a profit planting cover crops? What if we could make a profit using newer technologies like precision till farming or no-till farming to sequester more of that carbon in the soil? What if we could keep more land under conservation? One of the best ways to meet this challenge, and rural Iowa is already there with the solutions. Just put them in the driver's seat and get out of the way. If every single one of us does our part, if we can free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, fully embrace renewable energy technology and the high-wage, high-skill, high-value jobs that come with that, we can then take our rightful role as the indispensable country, convene the other powers of the planet to do their part as well, and stop this planet from warming another 2 degrees Celsius, after which the floods that we've experienced here, the storms in Texas, the droughts and the wildfires in California, they will pale in comparison if we cannot face this moment of truth and overcome these challenges right now. I believe in America. I know that this is a principle not just of the Democratic Party, but of the human race, to make sure that our kids looking back on us, the people of 2019, can be proud of the decisions that we made together. So whether it's immigration, or whether it's healthcare, or making sure this economy works for everyone, or confronting the greatest existential crisis we have ever seen, we've got to be able to do it together. This deeply divided, highly polarized country has to find the common ground to pursue the common cause. And that is how I am running to serve you, by going everywhere, not writing anybody off, not taking anyone for granted. And it is how I want to serve you, by bringing the best of America together. Thank you all for having us. At the back of the room, Cynthia Cano has a microphone. If you have a question, a comment, an idea or suggestion, we'd love to bring the mic to you. So if you can get Cynthia's attention, she'll bring it to you.
You raise your hand, I will make my way to you.
I don't know if that mic's on, Cano. There you go.
Here we go. You raise your hand, I will come to you. Here's one. We have up here. Go.
So what are your thoughts on Native American policies?
It's interesting, J.D. Schulten was just talking to me about a suit on behalf of Native American nations that might change land ownership in a huge way in Oklahoma right now. And we were talking about how this country has never really reconciled the foundation of this country and the ownership of land and the consignment to those who preceded today's generation of Americans in this place, literally where we are right now in Oklahoma, where that suit is taking place. So at a minimum, let's make sure that everyone has a seat at the table. At a minimum, let's fund our obligations. I think of the Bureau of Indian Education. I've been to some of these schools on these reservations, and they're funded at a fraction of what we see in other public schools across this country. Access to technology is not commensurate with what we're seeing in my hometown or maybe your hometown. So investing in the next generation of leadership in those communities, making sure that we listen to them on issues that they have understood far longer than we have been a country. Our stewardship of the land, the waterways, the environment, the soil, and the air. So in order to meet that obligation and not just talk the talk, but also walk it as well, you will see in our campaign spending more time in Indian country, spending more time with Native American leaders, and making sure that their ideas and suggestions and questions are part of the conversation. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
How are you going to attract the independents and the Republicans who don't like Donald Trump?
Yeah. I think part of it is being here in solo country, right? And making sure that I take the time to listen and learn from you and others. But I'll also tell you that we bring some experience in doing this from my time in Texas. Last year and in 2017, running for Senate, I visited 254 counties, every single one of them in Texas. We went to the big blue places so as not to make them feel like they were taken for granted. But we also went to the red, rural places. So red you can see them glowing from outer space as you orbit planet Earth. King County voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election. But we showed up in King County. It's because we believe that no one should be taken for granted. Everyone should be heard and listened to, fought for, and represented. And I have no hope of doing that if I have not shown up first. But I also want to tell you this. I'm the son of a lifelong Republican mother. And we got her to vote for me in this last election. We also got 500,000 of our fellow Texans who voted for a Republican for governor to vote for us on the same ballot. We won independence in Texas for the first time in decades. We saw the greatest turnout of Democrats in a midterm election in the history of the state, and I won more votes than any Democrat had in the history of Texas. And that was by going everywhere, not trimming our sails, talking about the issues that we care most about, having the courage of our convictions, but also listening to and learning from people. And one example to show you how we put it into practice. When I was in Congress, every day for those 6 years, I was in the minority, and I also served on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. And at a meeting like this, I learned that veterans in this country who come back from serving this country, putting their life on the line, if they have an other than honorable discharge, were denied the ability to go into a VA, see a provider, and be taken care of. And though we have a horrifying rate of veteran suicide in this country already, the rate amongst those other than honorable discharge veterans is twice as high. So we wrote a bill, the Honor Our Commitment Act, to make sure that any veteran, regardless of status of discharge, can get into that VA and get life-saving help. But in the minority, though that bill was well-intentioned and well-written, it was going absolutely nowhere unless we could reach across the aisle and find someone with whom we could work. And that inherently meant that we had to compromise a little bit. A four-letter word in both parties right now. But the only way to get to the consensus bill that allowed us to pass it 435-0 in the House, get it passed in the Senate as well, and get it signed into law by the one man with whom I thought I could agree on almost nothing, Donald Trump. And yet we found enough common ground to be able to serve those who had stood up to serve this country. So, to those independents in the room, I will work with anyone, anytime, anywhere to advance the agenda of this country. I will put our differences aside in this country and its future before us. And I will also show up to listen to you to make sure that you're part of the conversation. Thanks for asking the question.
So you've hit 3 of my top 4 issues already. But I'm here this morning with 2 of my 3 children, one of whom is an Indian doctor in a way. She's an optometrist out in Arizona, working on the reservation, so I'm proud of that. But what can we do about this deficit that we are leaving them with? It is not what I want my kids to be saddled with.
Right. Thanks for asking the question. So $22 trillion in debt and counting. We'll add $1 trillion to it in the next fiscal year through deficit spending. My kids, who are 12, 11, and 8 right now, when they're looking back on this moment from the future, they will not be able to believe this. They'll say, look, so you had $4 trillion in outstanding infrastructure needs. In Iowa and Texas, many public school teachers are working a second and third job to make ends meet because we're not paying them enough right now. Millions of Americans do not have health care. We're fighting 6 wars halfway around the world. We have not put the resources up to take care of the veterans who have fought them. And your country's answer at that moment was a $2 trillion tax cut that flows to corporations already sitting on record piles of cash and the wealthiest at a time of record wealth and income inequality. How do we meet this challenge and make sure that we make our kids proud when they look back on the people of 2019 and 2020? We first roll back the worst of those Trump tax cuts. So a corporate rate that went from 35% down to 21%. We don't need to take it all the way back up, but if we got to 28%, we would generate hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years to invest in people and communities, education and healthcare, to make this country more resilient and ensure that this economy truly includes every single one of us. We could take a hard look at these wars that we asked service members to fight. Fewer than 1% of our fellow Americans have worn the uniform since 9/11. They are bearing the burden of this country's foreign policies. 18 years and counting in Afghanistan, it's added $6 trillion to the national debt. We have no definition of victory, no commonly understood strategy, and no end in sight. So let's bring these wars to a conclusion, bring those service members back home, use the peace dividend to invest in their care and their treatment, and also make sure that we reduce the deficit spending and the debt that we have right now. No more new wars, no more unfunded tax cuts in this country. Invest in people and communities, education and healthcare, and this economy comes roaring back to life for everyone, and we don't put it on the national credit card in order to do it. Thanks for asking the question.
What are your plans for student debt?
Question is, what is the plan for student loan debt right now? We're making it really hard for far too many of our fellow Americans to be able to choose to go to college. There is $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt right now, and on average, those who are graduating this year will have about $40,000 on their back. We're seeing a default rate of about 10%, which means this is unsustainable. So a couple of ideas. First, let's stop creating the problem or digging the hole. Let's make sure that the first 2 years of college are completely free, and that 4-year education is debt-free, not just for tuition, but room and board and books for lower and middle income Americans. And for those of you who have some student loan debt that you're paying back, if you make a commitment to public service, teaching school, serving in public education, working at the VA to take care of one of those veterans who put their life on the line for this country, I want to wipe clean and clear your debt so you can focus on unlocking that lifelong love of learning in that child or delivering for that woman or man who served this country. And then I want to do this. I also want to elevate the role of unions in this country, because not every child, not every graduating high school senior is going to go to college or want to go to college. But what if you could, debt-free, learn a trade or a skill that would allow you to command a living wage for the rest of your life? We've got our work cut out for us here in Iowa and in Texas to diminish the role and the power of unions. If we can get that back, we'll also get back the middle class in this country and really see economic growth for everyone. Thanks for asking the question.
My question's a little bit longer, I'm sorry.
Take your time.
So, as you said earlier, when you're talking about healthcare, the thing that I've heard you say a couple of times, like during the debate and right here tonight, or this morning, is if you like your insurance, you can keep it. And that's always been confusing to me because I've never once heard anybody say that they like their insurance. I've never heard anybody say that they like their deductible or their copay or their premiums. So when you're talking about keeping private insurance around, you're talking about keeping a $25 billion profit industry around that's making money on the backs of sick Americans. And you're talking about keeping around an industry that has rescission, where people try, these companies try any reason to not pay for somebody's coverage. And you're talking about people who are locked in jobs that they hate because they're afraid of the lapse in coverage from leaving a job that offers employer health care. So I would like you to explain why you talk in your Medicare for America plan, keeping private insurance around when it doesn't seem like the right kind of industry to have around.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I agree with you about many of those concerns, and it's why in our plan, Medicare for America, should you not like the insurance plan that you're on, you are free to choose Medicare. I just have listened to so many people who do like the plan that they're on. And I mentioned earlier members of unions who fought for that, who said, I don't want to move over to Medicare. I fought long and hard for this. In fact, I didn't get the wage increase that I wanted because I wanted to make sure that I got the health care plan that our family needed. It works for me and it works for us. I trust them and the decision that they've made. I also trust them if they want to make a decision to move to Medicare. The goal for me is ensuring that it's universal, every single person, that it's guaranteed. And to your point, many people are insured today but are not guaranteed to get the care that they need. You just said this, they may not be able to afford a copay. There was a school teacher in Weatherford, Texas, who died of the flu. She had insurance. She didn't have $119 in her checking account, which was the copay on flu medication that would have kept her alive. We changed healthcare in America so that there are no longer deductibles for anyone, employer-sponsored insurance or in Medicare. We significantly reduced out-of-pocket costs, a third of what they are today, and then zero for lower-income Americans and close to zero for middle-income Americans, so that it's literally guaranteed for every single one of us. We're also going to drive down the cost of prescription medication. Medicare will be able to use its purchasing power as leverage to bring down the cost of the medications that you and I invested in through our tax dollars in research and development, clinical trials, and then we buy them through Medicaid, Medicare, the VA, and TRICARE. Let's make sure that they're affordable to our fellow Americans. So I understand that we each have a different path to get to that goal. I just want you to know that I'm strongly focused on it and want to make sure that we get there as soon as possible. And in my opinion, that's the best path to do that. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm from Aberdeen, South Dakota, and I want to invite you to come speak, please, in our area.
Let's do it.
But also, we attended the Lights for Liberty protest in Aberdeen, and I have a quick question about that. One, is it true that they're holding donated supplies outside of the detention camps and not allowing the children to have them and the people? Also, what is your plan for reuniting? We've become so divided by racism and the hate rhetoric, and there's so many people that are embracing it, and I wonder how you're going to win them back.
Yeah. So the first question is, how do you reunite these families that have been separated? And to add urgency to this, I want to share a quick story. We were in El Paso. There's a wonderful Catholic charity called Annunciation House that has facilitated some of these reunions. The child who was separated from their families, the parent who may have been deported back or was held in detention by ICE, finally are released and are able to come together. And what surprised me, and may or may not surprise you, was though they had been separated for months, those children, when they saw their mother again for the first time, didn't smile, didn't cry, had no expression whatsoever on their face, almost an inability to attach with the person who may have saved your life, but whom you also associate with the greatest pain and suffering that a child could experience. So we're doing lasting damage, and the sooner we meet this challenge, the better for those kids. As I said earlier, let us spare no expense, including bringing some of those parents back if they've been deported to Guatemala, El Salvador, or Honduras, so they can join their kids right now. Let's make sure that there's real accountability for those who are responsible for the suffering that those children who have endured, those 6 deaths that we've seen. That kind of accountability and justice ensures that there's no impunity and prevents that from happening going forward. And let's rewrite our immigration code so that no one can be criminally prosecuted for seeking asylum or refuge or shelter going forward. I think that's a great place for us to start from in order to meet this challenge. The second question. You all saw the video or read the reports of a rally that the president held in North Carolina after asking for, is that this is not, in terms of his record, an anomaly, nor is it only offensive to our sensibilities or to our ears. I think we risk fundamentally changing the character of this country. You do not put kids in cages until you start looking at them as something less than human. You don't have the mosque in Victoria, Texas burned down. That mosque in my home state was burned to the ground on the same day that the president signed his executive order attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States of America. Hate crimes are on the rise every single one of the last 3 years. And I truly believe this moment is going to define us forever after, one way or another. You were asking about the debt and the deficit, and I was thinking about this moment through the perspective of my kids' eyes when they're looking back on us. They'll also look back on how we met this challenge. So let's call it out for what it is. It's racism, it's bigotry, it's nativism. It is not the best traditions of this country.